The last check I wrote for my daughter was $47,000. She stood at a microphone 3 weeks later, in a church fellowship hall I had never been invited to, and told a room full of women she had never met that it was the day she finally felt free of me. That is the sentence I need you to sit with, not the number, the framing. $47,000. Student loans, gone. Car payment, gone. 18 months of back rent, gone. I did not hand her that money with a list of conditions. I did not sit across a kitchen table with a ledger and a pen and a set of rules she had to follow to receive it. I transferred it the way you do when someone you love is drowning. Quickly, without theatrics, because you cannot stand to watch them go under one more time. And she looked at me. I remember this so clearly. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has finally released a handle you didn't realize they were gripping. And she said, "Thank you, Mom. I feel like I can breathe." I believed her. I want you to know that first. I believed every syllable of it. My name is Carolyn. I am 58 years old. I am a retired medical billing coordinator, a homeowner, and a woman who has lived below her means her entire adult life, specifically so the people she loved would not have to. I grew up watching my own mother count coins in a grocery store parking lot before deciding whether we could afford a gallon of milk that week. I made a decision very early, quiet, bone deep, that money would never be the reason my children suffered. Never. My daughter Sienna is 29. She is bright in the way that makes people underestimate how deliberate she is. She laughs easily and cries at commercials and has a gift for making every person in a room feel like her favorite. When she was 22, she graduated with a communications degree and $41,000 in student debt. I had co-signed 2 of the loans, a fact I will not pretend was wise in hindsight, but at the time, it felt like love. It felt exactly like love. The help didn't begin with the loans. It began before she was out of school. Grocery runs when she was short. Gas money sent without her having to ask. A new laptop when hers crashed the week before finals. Small things. The kind that don't register as a pattern while you're still inside them. That's the thing about slow accumulation. You never notice the moment generosity becomes something the other person depends on, and then starts to resent you for. By the time she graduated, I had been absorbing her financial shortfalls for 3 years. By 26, her car loan was in my name. By 27, I was covering $700 of her rent each month because she'd signed a lease in a neighborhood her salary couldn't quite reach. I want to be precise about one thing. She never asked me to stop. Not once. She never said, "Mom, this is too much. I need to do this on my own." She accepted every transfer, thanked me each time, and continued building a life we were quietly co-funding. And then, 3 months after I made that final student loan payment, she began to go quiet. Not all at once, the way a tide goes out. A text where there used to be a call. A short text where there used to be a long one. Excuses at the holidays. A coldness that arrived without explanation and settled in like a change in season. I did not know yet what she was saying about me. I did not know yet what she had decided I was. But before we go further, I want you to hold on to one thing. I kept every receipt, every wire transfer confirmation, every co-signed document, every text where she thanked me. Not because I plan to use them, because I am simply the kind of woman who keeps things. And it turns out, that is the most important thing about me. If you have ever been the one who gave everything and been handed a label for it, stay with me. Around here, we don't just survive it, we understand it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let's keep the firelight going. And that day she told me she could finally breathe. That ordinary, unremarkable afternoon is where the story actually begins. I want to tell you who Sienna was before I tell you who she became. Because I think you deserve to understand why it took me as long as it did, why I kept reaching, why I kept explaining myself, why I kept believing there was a version of this that ended with us sitting across from each other at a table, talking it through like two people who loved each other. Because we did love each other. I need you to know that wasn't manufactured. Sienna was the kind of child who brought home injured birds, who cried when she watched the news, who wrote me letters, actual handwritten letters when she went to summer camp, because she said phone calls felt too fast for what she wanted to say. She was sensitive in the way that you hope a child will be sensitive. Not fragile, not dramatic, but genuinely tuned in to the world around her. I raised her alone from the time she was 11. Her father left in the way some men leave. Not all at once, but in installments, until one day there was just nothing left of him to wait for. And it was the two of us. For a very long time, it was just the two of us. That history matters. I want you to hold it, because it explains the shape of what came later. When you have been someone's entire world, when you have been the one who stayed, you develop a particular kind of blind spot. You confuse closeness with safety. You assume that because someone has seen you at your most unguarded, they would never use that against you. I was wrong about that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Sienna met Devin at 24. He was 31, worked in marketing, had opinions about everything, and the particular confidence of a man who had never been seriously challenged. I tried to like him. I want to be honest about that. I genuinely tried. He was charming in the way that requires an audience, funny in groups. But the first time I was alone with him for more than 10 minutes, I noticed something. He had a very subtle way of repositioning every conversation so that he was the authority in it. Even conversations about things he knew nothing about. Small thing. I filed it away. What I did not notice, not then, was how Sienna began to change in his company. Not dramatically, gradually, the way water reshapes stone, so slowly you'd never call it erosion while it's happening. The first time I heard something concerning was from my sister Diane. Diane called me on a Tuesday in October, about 4 months into Sienna's silence, and she was careful about it, the way people are careful when they're not sure how much to say. She told me that Sienna had mentioned at a family dinner I hadn't been invited to, that she'd spent years feeling like my financial help came with what she called invisible strings, that she never felt like the money was just given, that she always felt watched, evaluated, like she owed me something she could never fully repay. I sat with that for a long time before I responded. I sat with it the way you sit with something that makes no sense and you keep turning it over, certain you are missing a piece that will make it click. Because there were no strings. There was never a conversation where I itemized what I'd given her and named what I expected in return. There was never a moment where I held money over her head in an argument. The receipts I kept, every transfer confirmation, every co-signed document, they were organizational. They were the habit of a woman who grew up with nothing and learned very early that paper is the only thing that doesn't lie. But I was starting to understand something. The story Sienna was telling, It was not about what I had actually done. It was about how she had decided to feel about it. And there is very little you can do when someone has decided to rewrite the past, because the rewrite happens in rooms you were never in. I went looking. I am not ashamed of that. When someone you love goes quiet and the silence starts arriving secondhand through other people's mouths, you go looking. And what I found on a Wednesday night at 11:15, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold, I was not prepared for it. But I want you to hold on to this before we get there. Sienna had been posting for 6 months, and she had an audience. And that audience was about to become very relevant to everything that came next. The account had been active for 6 months. 6 months of posts, 6 months of comments, 6 months of strangers in her replies typing, "I see you, queen," and "This is so brave," and "Your healing journey is inspiring me." And in every single post, every one, there was a mother. Unnamed, but described in enough detail that anyone who knew us would recognize her immediately. There was the mother who paid for things as a form of control, the mother whose generosity always came back around, the mother who couldn't let her daughter become independent without making it about herself. Post after post, carefully worded, just vague enough to avoid a name, just specific enough to be unmistakable. I want to tell you what that feels like, reading yourself through someone else's narrative. It is a very specific kind of vertigo, because some of the facts are accurate. I did pay for her loans. I did co-sign her car. I did cover her rent. The skeleton is mine. But the story built around that skeleton, the meaning assigned to each bone, I did not recognize myself in it, not even distantly. She had 43,000 followers, 43,000 people who knew me as the villain in my daughter's story before I even knew the story existed. I scrolled for 2 hours that night. I read every caption. I read the comments, which I should not have done, but I did. And somewhere around the 3rd hour, my tea long forgotten, the kitchen gone cold around me, I found the post that made my hands stop moving. It was a teaser, a graphic, simple, well-designed, Sienna always had an eye, that read, "Coming soon, my story, in my own words, podcast episode dropping in 2 weeks." 2 weeks. I sat there for a long time. Long enough for the clock to move from 11:15 to 1 in the morning. I kept thinking, she is going to tell 43,000 strangers a version of my life that I have no way to correct. She is going to sit across from a microphone in a room I am not in, and she is going to describe a woman I do not recognize as myself. And those 43,000 people will believe her, because why wouldn't they? She sounds so certain. She always sounds so certain. What I did not know, what I could not have known that night, was that the podcast was the smallest part of it. Because while I was reading Sienna's posts, Devin had been busy in the comments. Not the public comments, the replies. A woman named Gretchen, a follower Sienna had apparently been building a closer relationship with, someone who ran a toxic family survivors community page, had asked in a private thread that Sienna had screenshotted and posted publicly without realizing the metadata was still embedded. "When does the episode drop, and do you need help with the rollout?" And Devin had replied, 2 weeks. We're sending it directly to her workplace contacts, her church group, and every family member who still talks to her. We want her to find out the same way everyone else does. No warning. No warning. The audience now knows something Carolyn does not. This was never just about healing. This was never just about Sienna finding her voice, or processing her past, or building a community of women who understood her. This was a campaign, coordinated, calendared, and aimed with precision at every corner of Carolyn's life: her professional reputation, her church community, her remaining family relationships. The podcast was not a beginning, it was a detonator. And Carolyn, sitting alone in her kitchen at 1 a.m, had just found the fuse, without knowing yet how far it ran. I need to step out of the story for just a moment, because I have something to say directly about Devon. There is a particular kind of person who takes someone else's wound, someone else's complicated, real, messy grief, and turns it into a weapon, who looks at a daughter's pain and sees not something to help heal, but something to aim. That is not a partner. That is an architect. And Sienna, whether she fully understood it or not, had handed him the blueprints. I'm not excusing her, I'm locating him. Because in stories like this, there is almost always someone standing just off frame, quieter, more calculating, who benefits most from the fire. Fire emoji. Drop your thoughts below. I want to know if you saw him coming. But Carolyn was not finished looking. And what a woman finds when she has spent 30 years keeping every piece of paper is that the truth has a way of being very, very well documented. And she hadn't opened the folder yet. I did not sleep that night. I want to be straightforward about that, not for sympathy, but because I think you need to understand the state I was in when I made the decision to stop being passive about this. There is a particular kind of sleeplessness that is not about anxiety. It is about clarity. The kind that comes when something you've been half-sensing for months finally resolves into a shape you can see clearly. That was the night for me. By 5 a.m, I had made 3 decisions. The first, I would not call Sienna. Not yet. Every instinct I had was screaming to pick up the phone and ask her what she thought she was doing. But I have been alive long enough to know that when someone has spent 6 months building a case, the last thing you want to do is hand them new material. Anything I said in that phone call would become a post. I knew that now. The second decision, I would call my cousin Harriet. Harriet is 71 years old, has survived 2 husbands and a hostile corporate acquisition, and has the particular gift of being the person in every family who actually pays attention. She had already seen the posts. Of course she had. Harriet sees everything. She called me at 6:45, before I could call her, and she did not open with pleasantries. She said, "Carolyn, how long has this been going on?" I told her everything, and then Harriet told me something that I had not found yet in my own scrolling. She had seen the screenshot, the one with Devon's comment in the reply thread, the coordinated rollout plan. She had screenshotted it herself the night before, because Harriet knows things disappear. "They're sending it to your office," she said, "to Pastor Glenn's email list, to your brother Marcus. 2 weeks, Carolyn. You have 2 weeks. 2 weeks." The third decision I made that morning, the one that would matter most, was to open the folder. I keep my financial records in a red accordion folder that lives on the top shelf of my home office closet. It is not glamorous. It is not a spreadsheet. It is 43 receipts, 11 wire transfer confirmations, 2 co-signed loan documents, a lease addendum, and a folder within the folder labeled simply texts. Printed, Every thank you message Sienna had ever sent me regarding money, printed and dated, because that is the kind of woman I am. I laid it all out on my kitchen table. $47,218. That was the total. Not an estimate, the exact number, documented to the dollar, spanning 7 years. And then I noticed something. I had covered Sienna's rent for 18 months. $700 a month. I had the bank transfers to prove it, every one of them sent to an account in Sienna's name, per her request, for an apartment she told me she was renting alone. A studio, she'd said. Too small to really have anyone over, but it was hers, and that mattered to her after years of roommates. Except when I looked at the lease addendum, the one I'd co-signed when she'd needed a guarantor, the address listed 2 occupants, Sienna and Devin. Same apartment, same lease, same 18 months. Devin had been living there the entire time. Devin, who worked full-time in marketing, who drove a leased car, who had never once, in any conversation I was aware of, been described as financially unable to contribute to his own housing, had been a silent beneficiary of every dollar I sent. She had not lied to me in a single text message. She had simply arranged the truth so that I would never think to ask the right questions. If you have ever had someone rearrange the facts of your generosity until they looked like a crime, you know exactly what Carolyn is feeling right now. This is the moment. This is where the story turns. Stay with us. Subscribe if this is your first time here, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Around here, we don't just survive it, we understand it. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after I found the lease. Not because I was shocked, but because I was doing something I had not allowed myself to do in months. I was getting very, very quiet. And the women who know me know that when I go quiet, I am not done. I was just getting organized. The lawyer's name was Patricia. She had been practicing family and defamation law for 22 years, and she had the particular energy of a woman who has heard every version of every story and stopped being surprised by any of them. I sat across from her on a Thursday afternoon with my red accordion folder and my printed text messages and the screenshotted reply thread with Devin's comment, the rollout plan, timestamped, metadata intact. And I watched her read through everything without a word. When she finished, she set the papers down. She said, "You have more documentation than most clients I see at trial." I told her I grew up counting change in parking lots. She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. Patricia outlined my options carefully. A cease and desist to the podcast. Not a lawsuit, not yet, but a formal legal notice that the episode contained demonstrably false characterizations of a named individual's conduct, accompanied by documentation disproving the central claims. The podcast host, she explained, had 2 choices upon receiving it: pull the episode, or proceed with it and accept the legal exposure. Most independent podcasters, she said, when confronted with $47,000 worth of time-stamped bank transfers and a co-signed lease showing an undisclosed occupant, choose option 1. The second option Patricia raised I had not considered: the lease. When a tenant represents to a guarantor that they are the sole occupant of a unit, and the guarantor co-signs based on that representation, and there is in fact a second occupant of working age and income who should have been disclosed, that is a material misrepresentation on a legal document. Not a misunderstanding, a misrepresentation. I want to be honest about how I felt in that moment. It was not triumphant. It was the particular heaviness of holding proof that your child looked you in the eyes and made a calculated decision to deceive you. Not once in a moment of weakness, for 18 months, consistently, with planning. While I was sitting in Patricia's office, Harriet called. I stepped into the hallway to take it. My brother Marcus had received a message, not the podcast episode, it wasn't out yet, but a personal message from Sienna, carefully written. It described a pattern of financial control going back to Sienna's childhood. It asked Marcus to hold space for Sienna's experience. It did not ask him to cut off contact with me directly. It did not need to. It just planted the seed and let Marcus water it himself. He had not responded to my last 2 texts. I want you to understand, Marcus and I had spoken every Sunday for 11 years. That was the cost, right there. That was the part of this that did not have a receipt. I went back into Patricia's office and I told her to send the letter. What happened next was not what I expected, which is, I have come to understand, how real reversals work. The podcast host replied to Patricia's letter within 48 hours. Not with a fight, with a question. She wanted to know if I would be willing to provide a statement for her own records, to document that she had acted in good faith upon receiving new information. She was going to pull the episode, but she also told Patricia something else. Something that Patricia relayed to me on a Friday evening, just as I was sitting down to eat for the first time in what felt like days. Sienna had known the letter was coming. Someone had told her. And her response, rather than calling me, rather than reaching out, rather than doing anything that might suggest she wanted to find a way through this, was to post about it. Publicly. A vague, furious post about people who use legal intimidation to silence survivors. No names, but the timing was unmistakable to anyone following along. She had 43,000 followers. The post got 11,000 likes in 6 hours. And then, the comments started turning. Because Gretchen, the woman from the Survivors community page, the one whose private thread had contained Devon's rollout plan, had been watching. And Gretchen, it turned out, had her own questions about how that private conversation had become a public screenshot in the first place. The fire Sienna had aimed so carefully at me, she had built it on a platform that had other people standing in it too. And one of them had just noticed they were standing in it. The podcast episode was officially pulled on a Tuesday. No announcement, no explanation posted publicly. The listing simply disappeared from the host's feed. The teaser graphic, the coming soon post, all of it, as quietly as if it had never been scheduled. Patricia sent me a 1-line email. Confirmed removed. No further action required at this time. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I was trying to locate what I expected to feel. Relief, vindication, something bright and immediate. And finding instead something much quieter. The particular stillness of a thing being over. Within the week, Gretchen posted. It was careful. She was clearly someone who understood how these communities worked and knew better than to be reckless with her words. She did not name Sienna. She posted a longer reflection about accountability within survivor spaces, about how the same standards we apply to the people who hurt us must also apply to ourselves, about what it means when a private conversation meant to be supportive ends up used as public content without consent. She said she had some concerns about the integrity of a story she had helped amplify, that she was taking a step back to reassess. In community spaces like Sienna's, that language is a grenade. Gretchen had over 90,000 followers of her own. The comments did not turn violent. They turned something more damaging than that. They turned skeptical. Sienna posted nothing in response, not for 10 days. And the silence, after 6 months of almost daily content, was louder than anything she could have written. I want to be honest about what was not restored. My brother Marcus called me 11 weeks later. 11 weeks. It was a Sunday, and it was shorter than our usual calls, and there was a carefulness between us, a new distance, not hostile but present, that I do not think will fully close. He believed me. He said that. But he had also seen things about his sister that he could not unsee, and I think being asked to choose, even implicitly, had changed something in him that the facts alone couldn't repair. I accepted that. I am still accepting it. Because that is what these stories cost. Even when you win, and I am using that word loosely, carefully, the accounting is never clean. You do not get back the 11 weeks. You do not get back the night you sat alone in a cold kitchen reading yourself described as a villain. You do not get back the easy Sundays before any of this existed. What you get is the truth, documented and standing, and the knowledge that you did not flinch from it. I did one more thing before I considered this chapter closed. Something I chose, something deliberate and quiet and entirely within my rights. I contacted the landlord. I submitted formal written notice of my intent to withdraw as co-signatory on the lease, per the termination clause in the original guarantee agreement, with the required 60-day notice period. I provided the documentation the landlord required. I was polite, I was precise. I gave them everything they needed to process the change. 60 days later, Sienna and Devon received a letter from the property management company informing them that their lease guarantor had withdrawn and that they would need to requalify independently or make alternative arrangements before the next renewal period. Devon, as it turned out, had a credit event from 3 years prior that he had apparently never mentioned to Sienna. I only know this because Harriet knows everything. Bless Harriet. I did not call to warn them. I did not need to. The letter said everything. I still have the red accordion folder. It sits on the same shelf. I do not think about it often, but I know it is there, the way you know a good lock is on a door. Not because you're afraid, but because knowing changes the quality of the quiet. Sienna has not contacted me. I have made my peace with the possibility that she may not. I spent a long time believing that the love I gave her obligated her to something. I understand now that it did not. Love is not a contract. But documentation is. If this story found you, if some part of what Carolyn carried felt familiar in your chest, I want you to know you are not watching this alone. The women in this community have lived versions of this. Quieter versions, louder versions. Versions where the receipts were never found, and versions where the truth came out in ways no one planned. Leave a comment below. Tell me which moment hit you hardest. Share this with the woman in your life who needs to hear that keeping the records was not paranoia. It was wisdom. It was always wisdom. She didn't win by fighting louder. She won by knowing more. Remember that. The firelight is always on. I'll see you next time.